He'll forever be remembered as the CEO who wrecked one of America's great companies, GE. Jeff Immelt took charge in 2001. When he left 16 years later, it was $170 billion smaller. Now, Immelt is offering his version of what happened.
One of the things that gets portrayed is that, I steamrolled my leaders all the time and I wasn't listening.
His book, Hot Seat, accepts blame for some mistakes, but holds others responsible too, including the legendary Jack Welch.
There were times when he did things that angered me, and it's important for people to see the totality of the story.
Find out what he thinks of GE's current CEO, plus his views on succession and corporate social responsibility in this conversation with Jeff Immelt. In 2001, you took the reins at what was then the world's most valuable and arguably most admired company. The company you left 16 years later was a turnaround case. What happened?
We had, through multiple recessions, we had really generated record earnings and cash flow. We had good businesses, good people, good initiatives, but at the end of the day, the stock price lagged. There are some things that didn't work. We didn't get as much value out of GE Capital as we could have. We had tough end-use markets at the end of my tenure. I gave the board a lot of things to work on. So it's a complicated story, but I think the way it's been told has been incomplete. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't think about the company. There is a sense I have that if I let people down, that wears on me. Did all my decisions work? No, they didn't. But could anybody have tried harder or loved the company more or been more purposeful about the company than me? I don't think so.
Jeff, for years, you declined to criticize Jack Welch, your predecessor, the man you succeeded as CEO. But he emerges from your narrative as something of a scoundrel, maybe even a bit of a villain, and someone you grew to dislike. Why the change of heart?
I'm tougher on myself than I am on anybody else, including Jack. And so I loved him. I respected him. There were times when he did things that angered me. And it's important for people to see the totality of the story and not just one side or another. I really tried not to be, tell my side of the story. I just tried to tell the story, the truth, a complete picture.
You single out one person for what I would describe, Jeff, as savage criticism, Steve Bowles, who ran the power business at GE. Why is that?
Look, there's been much written about the power business at GE. Let's tell the whole story and not just a slice of it. And that's what we try to do, is tell the whole story and not just one slice of it. And again, I'm more critical of myself than anybody else. I should have pushed harder to make a change in the power business. That's on me and not Steve. That's on me.
Jeff, had you walked away from the Alstom deal in 2015, how would things have been different?
I probably should have walked away, and if I had to do over again, I would have. But again, that wouldn't have been necessarily easy as well, because we would have gotten sued in France, and there's a whole series of other things that went with it. But if I had it to do over again, I would have probably walked away, just because there are too many other things going on at the same time.
How do you think things would have played out differently for you?
Oh, gosh, I just think the narrative changes, again, because I think one of the things that gets portrayed is that, I steamrolled my leaders all the time and I wasn't listening. And I think, again, if you reflect through the book, and when I have a narrative that's created by all the people that worked around me, there were just many instances where inside the company, people could push back, and we ended up changing our strategy and our course.
In your book, you're critical of John Flannery, your successor. In your telling, he was indecisive. He didn't build a team successfully, vacillated on strategy. Now that you've had even more time to think about it, Was he so hopeless as a CEO, or was he just stuck playing a terrible hand?
Let me just start by saying I left John more problems than I wanted to or should have. I think the Alstom acquisition, just the tail end of long-term care, that all came home to roost. So he just had really a set of challenges that I had never intended or wanted him to have. But he had to make fast decisions and at that moment to get out of it. And that was just something that the board and I always looked at as one of his development needs. So John's a valuable guy. He always did his best, and I'm really sad it didn't work. And I own my share of the blame for that.
Give me your honest assessment, good and bad, of how Larry Culp, the current CEO, is doing.
Oh, look, I think we all cheer for Larry every day. He's a great operator, and that's what the company needed. I just recently bought more GE stock, so maybe that's a good testament. And I just think he's what the company needs right now, and I cheer him on.
How big a shareholder are you?
A big one, still.
Well, I know you're cheering him on, but I think given your experience, given how intimately you know that company, your assessment is an important one. What do you approve of? What do you disapprove of?
Again, I think any assessment I would make on Larry is private, the way I always wanted it to be when I was CEO. And so really, I think Larry is what the company needs. And again, I'm with him and root him on, cheer him on.
Do you and he have a relationship, a close relationship?
Look, we've
Does he
known each
ask
other
for your
a long
advice?
time.
Do you offer it to him?
But I don't think he necessarily wants to look back and talk to people in the past, and I don't blame him for that. I think it's kind of a funny thing. Look, there were even when Jack and I weren't getting along that well, I would always ask him during a really difficult time. In 2008, he was very critical of me at a time when I needed a friend. But in 2009, when it came time to decide whether or not to cut the dividend, he was the first guy I called. And I'll never forget the advice he gave me, because I said I wouldn't cut the dividend. And he basically says something like this, Erik. He says, look, you can either be a consistent dumb guy or a smart guy that changes his mind. The choice is yours. And so we cut the dividend, and that was good advice. So Jack and I have known each other in a different way. Larry and I don't really know each other. And I think he just wants to focus on the future. And I respect that. Really, if he ever called, I'd be happy to help, but I'm going to leave that to him.
That's interesting, though, that the way he looks at his job, it's better for him, based on what I gather from you, not to talk to Jeff Immelt. He's just going to go forward, and whatever Jeff thinks is whatever Jeff thinks.
I think, and believe me, I'm okay with that. I've got other things to do. And like I said, everybody in the GE alumni network wants him to do well.
Do you think renewable energy should be spun off into a separate business?
Oh, look, I'm going to let the company think about where renewable energy should go. I look at Vestas, which is a big competitor in renewable energy, and it's got a $43 or $44 billion market cap, and it's roughly the same size as GE's renewable business. We may be a little bit smaller. So again, there's going to be opportunities for those businesses as time goes on. And
well, the reason I ask is because that's the conglomerate question, right? Does renewable energy benefit by being part of a larger General Electric? And even if it does, would shareholders be better off having it as a separate company because of the promise of green technology and the multiple that the business could attract over and above what the larger GE gets? I
think that's a fair question, and one that the current leadership team and board ought to be thinking through. I think if you look back in time, again, when I think about the perspective I would have, we always saw great value of renewable energy and gas turbine businesses together. We always saw them being able to be coupled with GE Capital in the context of financing projects. It allowed us to win, market share and growth around the world. So I would probably answer the question in the context of, It worked in the conglomerate structure in the GE that I ran. But again, the current team has to take a look at both capital markets and strategic flexibility and make the right call for today. I've been out of it for almost 4 years, and it's probably inappropriate for me to kind of give Larry advice in that regard.
You disapproved, Jeff, of the open horse race to succeed Jack Welch, a horse race, of course, you won. But when it came to succeeding you, this is what I find shocking. A company of 300,000 employees at the time, with one of the finest management training programs in the world, failed to produce a strong group of CEO contenders. How is that possible?
You know, again, I think, Erik, it's, we had Lorenzo Simonelli, who's a very successful CEO of Baker Hughes, Jeff Bornstein, who is an excellent CFO, and John, who showed many of the attributes of making a successful CEO. I will say, you know, and one of the things I take accountability for is I think we, as we ran the company with bigger and bigger divisions, we could have done a better job of creating smaller P&Ls so that we had an even deeper bench of P&L leaders coming through the system. And that's one of the things that I could have done differently and wish I had have done when I think about how best to deliver on leaders.
Every year, BlackRock's Larry Fink writes a letter to CEOs detailing his expectations as one of their biggest shareholders, often the biggest shareholder. Do you agree with the demands that he has made for action on climate change, on sustainability more broadly, and on social responsibility?
Well, I think one of the ways that the role of the CEO has changed is just the notion of context, really. I think I can kind of go from 2000 to 2021. It was kind of a private job in 2000. It's not that today. It's very public, whether it's on wage discrepancy, jobs in the United States, the role of China, social justice. I could go down the list. Now, I think that Larry is well known, well trusted, well respected, and his voice matters.
Do you believe in stakeholder capitalism, the principle that companies are beholden to a wide range of constituencies, employees, the community, the environment, and not just beholden to shareholders?
Oh, Erik, I think this is complicated in that the answer to your first question is yes. I believe you really need to understand how your company fits in with the world. And I teach MBA students at Stanford, and this is one of the things I drill into them, that the importance of context. I also think that if you're not executing, none of the good work you're doing on social context is going to keep you from getting fired. So it's necessary, but not sufficient to actually being able to run a company. And so all it really means is that the role of the CEO is more complicated today than it's ever been before, because you have to do all those things, but you have to actually be cognizant of, again, the way that your business needs to be operated and the commitments you make to investors and the primacy role that they have in terms of ultimately how the company gets valued.
But it sounds to me as though you believe that the world has moved on from Milton Friedman and the idea that a company has only one duty, and that duty is to its owners.
Yeah, look, I think we've had 50 years, let's say, of Milton Friedman, right? And we are where we are. Some good, right, in terms of competitiveness and innovation, some bad in terms of the impact on the environment and social justice and other things that surround the company. So I think that basically there has to be a more complicated, nuanced role that companies have. Look, my career basically spanned from, let's say, 1980 until 2017. For the first 20 years, basically leaders of my generation thought we could shut down factories, move the work wherever we wanted to. If wages were lower in India, or if wages were lower in Mexico, if wages were lower in China, we could just shut them down and move the work. And basically people would love us and we would be fine. I think, it wasn't that President Trump changed that. That was already changing. People were already looking at companies and saying, it's hard for us to assess that you're a good member of this society when that's all you're doing. And so you start to see companies moving work back to the United States or thinking about different ways to manage their workforce. So I just think these things have changed, and CEOs today need to be aware of that, need to be on top of it, and need to be ahead of it, actually. Anybody, basically, in 2020, in the era of COVID, that had a sole source manufacturing in China for a product missed all the clues, right? They missed all the things that were going on around them that said, that's a high-risk strategy.
America is struggling to define its relationship with China. We crave access to its giant and growing markets, but increasingly find ourselves locked in, call it a zero-sum battle for military power, geopolitical influence, and technological supremacy. Where do CEOs belong in that struggle?
China has graduated more engineers than the US and Europe combined for 30 years. Intellectual property theft and things like that are really critical and have happened in the past. But now you have a country that can do its own innovation, that can run its market on its own, that has foreign policy that's more aggressive than the US's around the world. And if it comes to big problems like climate change, basically the US is in second place in solving climate change because China has the bigger problems. So in some ways, they're going to be the most critical partner we can have. I'm thrilled that the US rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, but a strong bilateral agreement between the US and China on climate would be much more powerful right now in terms of what it means. So the long-winded answer is the US has been there, their CEOs have been there through multiple administrations, have deep perspectives on what's going on. We all are proud Americans, but I think all of us believe that a trade war or an economic battle between the US and China is just not in anybody's best interest. And so I think people need to be articulate about that right now in terms of what it means and how we can best work together.
Jeff, you describe yourself as a Republican. Your party faces a choice: double down on Donald Trump and his legacy, or distance itself from the former president. What would you like to see?
Look, I just think it's time for fresh ideas and new ideas in the party. Again, I think if you look back in time, let me just look back for a second. And you talked about it earlier, which is Milton Friedman, free markets. I think the old ideas of what it meant to be a Republican got stale. And they weren't replaced by new ideas. And what any party needs to do is find what are the right ideas for this decade, for not for me necessarily, but for my daughter, and speak to those. And I just think whether you're a company or a political party, or you're a small business or a big business or a leader or somebody that's working for a company, when you run out of ideas, that's a bad place to be.
Jeff, it was great to have the opportunity to speak with you about all these things. Thanks very much.
Erik, thanks.